That was the worst night of my playing life ever.
Another strange thing is, we hadn't really rehearsed enough.
Paul McCartney has played more than 2,500 concerts throughout his career. His life on stage began long before global fame. Between 1957 and 1969, there were roughly 1,300 performances. Years later, with Wings, McCartney would return to the road in a new phase of his career. From small university shows to massive world tours, the band added roughly 140 more concerts, re-establishing McCartney as one of the most important live performers of his generation. But the death of John Lennon changed Paul McCartney's priorities forever. For much of the 1980s, he stepped away from full-scale touring, focusing more on family life and appearing only occasionally in special events such as Live Aid or the Prince's Trust concert. That would change in 1989 when McCartney officially returned to touring with the Paul McCartney World Tour. Since then, he has added nearly 1,000 more concerts, performing around the world in shows that often stretch close to 3 hours, solidifying his reputation as one of the most enduring and active performers in the history of popular music. Now, approaching 84 years old, Paul McCartney is still touring. After more than 6 decades on stage, it would be easy to assume that things have almost always gone right. Of course, there have been occasional mistakes along the way. Technical problems, forgotten lyrics, even the occasional fall on stage. The kinds of small accidents that inevitably happen when you've performed thousands of concerts across the world. But McCartney has always done what great performers do. He kept going, finished the show, and moved forward. And yet, there was one night that Paul McCartney remembers very differently. One that, at the time, fueled speculation in the press about a possible Beatles reunion. The expectations surrounding that night were enormous. But years later, McCartney would remember it for a very different reason: the worst concert of his entire career.
Wings from then on is just a version of it. It's not the real deal. Same name, different vibe.
The ever-changing lineup of Wings. Joe, the drummer, got very homesick for America. And I remember thinking, oh, well, look, the group's breaking up again, and you can get fed up with that. People used to make a bit of fun of it, like, well, another band change for Wings.
Wings had always been a somewhat unstable band when it came to its lineup. Over the years, the group went through constant personnel changes, with members coming and going almost as part of its identity. By 1978, the band had once again returned to functioning as a trio. But Paul McCartney decided not to maintain that structure any longer, even though it had worked in the past. For the continuation of London Town, he wanted to expand the band again, bringing in a new lead guitarist and a new drummer. Denny Laine recruited Steve Hawley and Lawrence Juber.
You always made strenuous efforts to make it clear that Wings wasn't just a backing group, didn't you? That it was a complete band.
Yeah, well,
Why?
I don't know, really. I think I'd been accused of treating people just like sidemen, which I'd never meant to do.
In an attempt to avoid the problems that had affected earlier versions of Wings, both musicians were chosen carefully. They were younger, they were British, and they would receive a higher salary than any previous member of the band, ensuring that money would not become another source of tension. Looking for a renewed identity for the group, McCartney began working with them on what would become the next Wings album, Back to the Egg. The recording process lasted around 7 months and took place in some rather unusual locations. Part of the album was recorded in a castle in Kent, where the medieval atmosphere surrounding the project felt entirely unexpected within McCartney's musical world. Producer Chris Thomas would later admit that he never fully understood the internal dynamic of Wings, and at times even felt somewhat out of place during the sessions.
When I was working on Back to the Egg, I didn't feel as though I was even particularly producing it. I didn't know how stuff worked with Wings before.
Some recordings were made in staircases, libraries, and different rooms of the castle, as the band experimented with natural acoustics, searching for echoes everywhere, even in the kitchen. The rest of the album was completed at Abbey Road Studios, where one of the most remarkable moments of the project also took place: the recording of Rockestra Theme, a massive session that brought together musicians such as David Gilmour, John Bonham, John Paul Jones, Pete Townsend, and several others. The recording would later earn McCartney a Grammy Award. Even so, the album's creation was somewhat unconventional, and this time, some of McCartney's more unusual decisions did not work in his favor. During the mixing stage, due to limited space at Abbey Road, McCartney moved part of the work to a basement studio in Soho Square. There, he attempted to recreate the control room of Abbey Road's famous Studio 2, bringing in similar equipment and even installing a fake window with a large photograph designed to simulate the view of the original room. According to McCartney, it was a way of preserving the studio's atmosphere. Around this period, he decided to leave Capitol Records and sign with its direct competitor, Columbia Records. The new deal offered far more aggressive promotional support, along with an advance reportedly worth $22 million, making McCartney, at that time, the highest-paid recording artist in the world. Columbia spared no effort. The label gave him a catalog of classic American standards, including their full publishing rights, and even the use of the company's private jet whenever he needed it. The single, Goodnight Tonight, performed well in the charts, and expectations surrounding Back to the Egg began to grow.
Paul McCartney's last LP, Back to the Egg, flopped. 3 million sit in a warehouse with no buyers in sight.
Things did not turn out the way anyone had expected. Not the massive promotional campaign, not the elaborate presentation at Abbey Road, which included umbrellas arranged to resemble eggs inside a frying pan formed by black curtains, not the primetime television advertising, and not even the 7 promotional videos produced for the album could prevent the project from becoming a commercial disappointment. Although the record sold roughly 1 million copies, the result was still considered a financial loss for the label, and none of its 4 singles managed to reach the top 20. The press was quick to criticize McCartney, mocking what many perceived as his attempt to tap into the rising punk aesthetic after achieving such enormous success with a traditional ballad like Mull of Kintyre. Despite everything, Wings still had to go back on the road. By late November, the band was scheduled to return to the stage with a short 2-week tour across the United Kingdom. This time, instead of arenas and stadiums, the concerts would take place in theaters, a sharp contrast with the scale of their previous tours. At first, Paul appeared enthusiastic about returning to live performance, but as the tour approached, Steve Hawley and Lawrence Juber began to notice something unusual. McCartney's excitement for each upcoming show seemed to fade little by little.
When Wings started, he felt the need for a band because he came out of a band and that was, in his comfort zone.
I couldn't help thinking that he can play everything. He doesn't need anybody else.
Paul's kind of a people person. He's good around people and he likes people. He's been able to weather the storm pretty well. Linda she didn't like being in the limelight. Some of us are very uncomfortable with it.
We were feeling like we'd done what we set out to do. And we're getting a little bit fed up of another lineup. Here we go, another dollar, another day. It started to just wind down. The enthusiasm, I think, had peaked.
I think we've seen the sign on the marquee out front of the theater there that says Wings is sold out tonight. It doesn't appear that Wings is in any kind of trouble right now.
Well, we keep trying,
How do you keep it fresh? How do you keep it current? How do you keep them coming in?
I think the trick is we enjoy doing it. We've been making records together for about a year with this band. And so it's good fun now to go on the road and to do the songs to people. It's a new experience that we're still enjoying. I suppose when we don't enjoy it, we'll knock it on the head. But at the moment, we're enjoying it.
The first concerts of the tour seemed to go smoothly. The shows were sold out, and audiences were clearly excited to see Paul McCartney back on stage with this new lineup of Wings. But Steve Hawley, the band's drummer, would later recall the first signs that Paul's enthusiasm for the project was beginning to fade. Hawley understood that it wasn't something personal against the new members of the band. Rather, it seemed to reflect a growing exhaustion that both Paul and Linda were beginning to feel towards Wings itself. Hawley remembered how, after those early concerts, the new members of the band would come off stage completely exhilarated by the experience. But Paul didn't seem to share that same excitement. As Hawley later put it, it eventually occurred to him. Of course, Paul had been in the Beatles. This probably didn't feel quite as thrilling for him.
Now, we finished the week before Christmas, just in time to get a bit of shopping done.
Then we have one show on the 29th of December in London. It's a charity show, a few days and a lot of different groups.
As Christmas approached, British newspapers were filled with reports about the humanitarian crisis in Cambodia, which had recently been renamed Kampuchea. Thousands of refugees were trying to escape the brutal regime of the country's dictator, Pol Pot, while disease and famine spread rapidly throughout the region. Shortly after the tour ended, Kurt Waldheim, the Secretary General of the United Nations, contacted Paul McCartney to ask if he would be willing to organize a benefit concert to help raise funds for the relief effort. Taking advantage of the Christmas spirit, Paul agreed almost immediately, despite the extremely short notice. The original idea was simply for Wings to perform a single charity concert, but the plan quickly evolved into something much larger, one of the first major collective displays of social awareness from the British rock community. Under McCartney's leadership, 4 concerts for Kampuchea were organized at London's Hammersmith Odeon, beginning the day after Christmas. The lineup would bring together a remarkable mix of established and rising artists, including Queen, The Who, The Specials, The Pretenders, The Clash, Ian Dury and the Blockheads, and Elvis Costello. Almost immediately, rumors began circulating in the press. The final concert, scheduled for December 29th and headlined by Wings, might, according to some newspapers, become something far more historic, a possible Beatles reunion on stage. George Harrison and Ringo Starr had already agreed to participate in the event, although they preferred to perform with other musicians rather than simply join Wings. Just 3 weeks earlier, the 3 former Beatles had even reunited briefly at Eric Clapton's wedding, where they ended up playing together during the celebration. Because of that, the expectations surrounding the final concert began to grow rapidly. Once again, the possibility of seeing the Beatles together on stage suddenly felt real. The concert opened with Gotta Get You Into My Life, a classic from the Beatles catalog. From there, the band moved into Getting Closer and Every Night, followed by a mix of songs from the new album and several established Wings favorites. The setlist also included new additions to McCartney's live repertoire, such as The Fool on the Hill and Let It Be, along with a few classic rock and roll covers like 20 Flight Rock and Lucille. But the moment many people had come hoping to witness never arrived. The Beatles never appeared. George Harrison and Ringo Starr had initially been expected to participate, but both quietly withdrew once the press began reporting that their involvement had been confirmed. The rumors of a possible Beatles reunion were spreading quickly, and neither of them wanted to fuel that narrative. John Lennon, who had always remained a distant possibility, ultimately refused to take part as well. Still, the speculation continued. Some newspapers even claimed that Lennon was in London at the time, and a few reports went so far as to say he had already arrived at the theater and was watching the show from backstage. None of it was true. Instead, at one point in the concert, a robot appeared on stage.
Okay, over here, there is a little creature has just appeared. And this fella here is not John Lennon, as has been suggested.
Paul joked with Robbie the Robot, a surreal moment that briefly stole the spotlight and amused the audience. But behind the humor, something else was becoming increasingly noticeable. McCartney looked uncomfortable.
That was the worst night of my playing life ever. So there was no bottom coming off the bass. The monitors were incredibly bad. And I got breaking out in a sweat. In no way I could control it. I just knew this was bad.
I knew what happened, and people always asked me, but I blanked it. Probably in my mind, a band is a democratic unit. Everyone has an equal vote. And in the Beatles for 10 years, that had been the case. That was good. Everyone felt good about themselves. But in Wings, that wasn't the case. I was an ex-Beatle, so I saw myself as the leader of the group, which I'd never been in the Beatles, where the leadership had sort of moved around. There wasn't a leadership in the Beatles. People had said that John was, and later people said that I was, but neither of us ever acknowledged it. People would say, "Who's the leader of the group?" We'd say, "There isn't one," so it became a democracy. But Wings wasn't. Looking back, that could be why. I think a democracy works better. It wasn't as if it was a dictatorship, but we weren't all equal. Musically, we were various degrees of musical experience, and it might have been that that's what did it. Some of the songs on the set list simply didn't translate well live. Particularly, several of the newer tracks from Back to the Egg, which much of the audience barely knew.
Another strange thing is, we hadn't really rehearsed enough. All the other tours, we rehearsed a lot.
The crowd reacted politely, but without the electricity that normally surrounded a McCartney performance. And to Paul himself, the band didn't seem to be sounding quite right. The big thing about Wings was that we brought into the myth that it could never be as good as the Beatles. I knew it was the world's most difficult thing to bite off. Everything we did was in the shadow of the Beatles, which had recently been this phenomenal band. We did everything with quite a lot of paranoia. As the concert moved towards its final stretch, the energy improved slightly thanks to the appearance of guest musicians, and the closing moments of the show were far from catastrophic. But something was clearly off. When the night ended, the audience had seen a solid performance. Paul McCartney had experienced something very different.
And we said, well, what else should we do? Go around the world 10 more times? Maybe we had enough all this touring. Let's face it, I'd been doing it since I was like about 18 or something. The enthusiasm, I think, had peaked.
A quiet sense of dissatisfaction lingered over the evening, one that would weigh even heavier, knowing that, in just a few weeks, he would be taking this very same band on tour to Japan. 30 years later, Paul said, "I didn't want to go to Japan with this band. I felt under-rehearsed, and I don't like that feeling at all. I will normally rehearse so I feel we've got a great show. Then, I'm happy to go. We were going to rehearse in Tokyo, and I thought, oh, a bit last minute, so I was panicking about it all. And suddenly, I get busted, and I don't know, it feels strange. It's almost like I got myself busted to get out of it. I really don't know to this day. I also think, did someone put that stuff in there to bust me? I don't know. It's very psychodrama. Anyway, the upshot was, we got there, I got busted, and I really thought, this band isn't going to work. I'm not happy with it. There was something going wrong. Something was trying to tell me something. So that was the end of Wings. Since Wings had started, I must say I was looking forward to the day it ended, just to be able to say, Wings folded. I do remember wanting to say that. I'm not sure if anyone ever used it. The inevitable end of Wings came with his arrest in Japan, an unmistakable sign that it was time for McCartney to move in a different direction. Just days after returning to England following the incident, Paul began working independently on what would become McCartney 2. In many ways, the album marked both the quiet end of Wings as a band and the beginning of a new phase in his career. A return to being simply Paul McCartney, once again working on his own terms. Yet what initially seemed like a necessary step for his personal and artistic growth would soon open the door to one of the most devastating moments of his life. Reflecting on that period years later in conversation, McCartney said, "And how do you feel now about what Wings achieved? It's nice. There was something there. I now know that, but I didn't know it then. We lived in fear all those years. We just thought what we were doing was bad. We listened to our critics. We never thought we did anything good, which is a pity because there was good stuff there. Now there are some people liking it as much as the Beatles. There are people whose age made them actually prefer it, but we'd get slagged off everywhere and it was intimidating. It is nice now to come out of the tunnel and feel we did something good." The concert was edited and broadcast on television weeks later, and a compilation album was also released in order to continue raising funds. Officially, Paul only selected certain songs for distribution, and years later, he said about the recordings, "I've listened to the record since and realized it wasn't so bad, but at the time we hated it so much, it put us off being in a band for a couple of years. That's what led to the breakup." Thanks for watching this video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. I'm Blake Corrick, and this is Music Box.